Hello ESOL reading instructors. Today I want to just share with you a small project that you may be able to do with your students online that will help them understand the literary elements of fiction writing. This project will have a few different steps. The first step will be to define the literary elements for your students. Next, you will identify literary elements in different stories. And the final part of the project is to have your students create literary elements for their own stories. For the first step, if you are using Blackboard, there is a whiteboard option in this online platform, and you may start here and start out by telling a common child story that you remember from your own childhood. While you're telling the story, you may illustrate that with some of your own drawings. Now, it's not like you have to be a master artist to use this tool, and sometimes the worse it is, the more my students like it. But think of a story where you could illustrate in some way and let the students see if they can figure out what the story is. After you get through telling the story, and it may surprise you that some of your students know that and have that same story in their culture, then you could come to a literary elements worksheet or definition page and have this given to your students and try to have the students see if they can identify each part of the literary elements in the story that you have told. Of course, every story doesn't have all of these elements, but you can amend the list to the story that you have. The next part of the project would be to have your students in small groups talk about other stories that they know from their childhoods. And first they would explain the story to their partner, and then both of them would try to identify the literary elements in those stories. You could do that in breakout groups in your LMS. If you are using Blackboard, the breakout groups come under the Share Content tab here. And so you would click on the Share Content and then find your breakout groups. Here you can allow your students to make their own switches to go to a group that they would like to be in, or you can pre-assign those. And I would usually give them about 10 or 15 minutes to discuss stories that they remember from their childhood, and then bring them back to the group as a whole. The next step of the project is to have your students create a short story themselves with a small group. This may be about 3 or 4 students together to create their own short story. And this is not a quick project. I usually give them 3 or 4 weeks to work on this with maybe 10 or 15 minutes per class. In breakout sessions where they can get together and continue their creative planning. While students are working in their groups, I do pop into their groups by use of the breakout tool and just listen and offer a few suggestions, and also make sure that they are staying on track. If your LMS is like Blackboard, the recordings are not continued when you have breakout rooms activated. And so to keep them focused and keep them on track, I will go from breakout room to breakout room just to make sure that they are making good progress on their stories. After about 3 weeks or so of planning, the students should be ready to present their stories to the class. And this can be done 2 different ways. There are those outgoing students who would be willing to act out their stories, and I always give a little bit of a bonus incentive for those who will act out their stories for the class, and that's a lot of fun. This is easily done online, just as it is in a traditional class face-to-face setting, and students merely take their turns conducting their parts. If students are in groups where they do not want to act it out, they can just narrate the story to the class and then have their work credited that way. Now, as with all presentations, whether it's oral communication or reading, I have the audience members do a task. And so that task for this the other students who are watching the dramatic interpretation of these creative stories, the task for them is to identify the literary elements. And so they can do that on a worksheet, or I sometimes will ask them, go down the list and ask each person what part of the story represents the antagonist or the protagonist, or what the setting is, and so on. And so you can use that as a way to continually assess everyone's understanding of the literary elements that you're teaching. So that's it. Another good thing about this particular project being done online is that if students have a lot of fun with this, and usually mine do, they have an ability now to share with their parents back home what they have done. And they can take a small clip out of the recording of the class, and it just serves as a good update for parents to know what their students or family members have been working on in their English skills. I hope you have fun implementing this project. You may make your own tweaks and additions or omissions along the way.